Sophia stood on the balcony of her sunlit villa, one hand resting gently on her swollen belly, the other wrapped around a warm cup of herbal tea. The gentle rustle of palm leaves and the scent of fresh roses from her garden drifted through the air. Everything around her radiated peace: marble floors, gleaming chandeliers, and walls adorned with memories of her fairy-tale romance. From the outside, Sophia's life looked like a dream, the kind many women fantasized about. Married to Daniel Hartley, a successful real estate tycoon whose charm once turned every head in the room, and now preparing to welcome their first child. But in the quiet corners of her mind, the perfect picture had begun to blur. Daniel, once attentive and endlessly affectionate, had grown distant in recent months. His warm smiles had turned hollow, his late-night meetings more frequent. The gentle kisses he used to plant on her forehead before leaving the house were now replaced by rushed goodbyes and unread texts. Sophia had tried to convince herself it was just work stress. After all, they were expanding their business empire. But the way he avoided eye contact and the new passcode on his phone told a different story. Daniel's sudden closeness with his assistant, Lena Monroe, hadn't gone unnoticed either. Lena was striking, tall, sleek, with a voice that could melt metal and eyes that held secrets. She had started as a background figure, always in the corner of boardrooms and charity events, efficient and silent. But lately, Sophia saw her more often, in photographs, in Daniel's stories, and even in their home during work hours that never seemed to end. She brushed it off at first. Lena was just doing her job. But something about the way Lena looked at her, calm, calculating, almost triumphant, made her skin crawl. More unsettling were the subtle shifts in her daily life. Things in the house moved without explanation. Her keys were misplaced. A black car she didn't recognize seemed to idle at the end of their street more than once. Once, as she returned from a walk, she felt eyes on her, as if someone was just a breath behind. When she turned, there was no one. But the feeling lingered, wrapping around her like fog. Sophia tightened her grip on her belly and whispered to the unborn life inside her, "I'll protect you, no matter what." Deep down, something told her the storm hadn't just arrived, it was already inside the house. Lena Monroe wasn't always cold. Once, she had been a hungry, ambitious intern at Hartley Enterprises, working late nights just to get a glance from Daniel Hartley, the man who owned not only the company but every room he walked into. She remembered the first time he smiled at her, how her breath caught in her throat. That single moment became an obsession, an addiction. She didn't just want his attention, she wanted his world. She wanted him. Their affair didn't begin after his marriage. It started long before the wedding vows were ever spoken. Back then, Sophia was just the girl he was seeing, the woman who brought home cooked meals to the office and kissed Daniel on the cheek like they were already married. Lena despised it. She watched it unfold, always just a few steps behind, pretending not to care. But behind the scenes, it was Lena who lingered at his office door late at night, who made sure his coffee was just the way he liked it. She knew how to make him feel like a king. One night, months before Daniel proposed to Sophia, it finally happened. A late-night meeting turned into wine, and wine turned into whispered secrets in the dark. He told her things about Sophia, how she was too emotional, too soft, too needy. Lena listened, smiled, and gave him what Sophia never could: silence and submission. From that moment on, Lena believed it was only a matter of time before Daniel left the woman he clearly didn't love. But then came the engagement, and the pregnancy, and the glowing articles in business magazines about the perfect couple. Something inside Lena snapped. She began to loathe Sophia, not just because she had Daniel, but because of what she represented: softness, vulnerability, and privilege wrapped in pearls and baby showers. Lena saw her as weak, a woman who didn't deserve the power, the wealth, or the man she had so effortlessly secured. In Lena's eyes, Sophia had stolen everything that should have been hers. Daniel, for all his charm and success, was nothing if not spineless when it came to confrontation. He never truly told Lena to stop. When she hinted at how unstable Sophia had become, her forgetfulness, her paranoia, the tears she shed behind closed doors, Daniel didn't argue. Instead, he sighed, ran his hand through his hair, and let the silence between them settle like a guilty agreement. "Maybe she's not well," Lena would say, voice dripping with feigned concern. "Pregnancy can do strange things to the mind. You said she was crying in her sleep again." And Daniel, exhausted and eager to avoid any real conflict, would nod. "She's not herself lately." Lena began planting ideas subtly, leaving fake prescriptions in Sophia's purse, arranging for the housekeeper to find shattered glass, accidentally, left behind, and once even switching her prenatal vitamins with sugar pills just to watch Sophia panic when her nausea didn't subside. The more Daniel distanced himself, the more empowered Lena felt. She wasn't just his mistress anymore. She was his savior. And in her twisted mind, removing Sophia from the picture wasn't cruel, it was necessary. The morning was unusually quiet when Lena appeared at Sophia's doorstep, dressed in soft beige tones and holding a thermos of chamomile tea. Her smile was warm, her voice syrupy as she said, "I thought you could use a break. Just a little drive to the mountains. Nothing fancy, just some fresh air and peace. It might help calm your nerves." Sophia hesitated. The shadows under her eyes betrayed the sleepless nights, and her heart ached from the cold silences with Daniel. Normally, she would never agree to be alone with Lena, but something in her craved escape. The house, once her sanctuary, now felt like a prison. She rubbed her belly, thinking of the baby, and nodded slowly. "Okay. Just a short trip." The drive began quietly. Lena played soft instrumental music as they passed winding roads and dense forests. Trees stretched upward like watchful guardians, and the air grew crisper with every mile. Sophia tried to relax, gazing out at the wild landscape, but an uneasy feeling sat low in her chest. They had been driving for over an hour when the paved road gave way to gravel, and eventually to a narrow dirt path. "Are we still on the main route?" Sophia asked, eyebrows furrowed. Lena smiled without looking away from the wheel. "There's a hidden lookout up ahead, perfect view, barely touched by tourists." Moments later, the car jerked violently and sputtered to a halt. Smoke curled from beneath the hood. "What happened?" Sophia asked, alarmed. "Engine overheated, I think," Lena replied casually. She stepped out and motioned toward the dense woods. "We're not far from the cliffs. There's a hiking path nearby. We can walk. It'll do you good." Sophia looked down at her belly, then at the forest, uncertainty flashing across her face. "Are you sure it's safe?" Lena chuckled, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "We're surrounded by nature, Sophia. It's the safest place there is." Sophia stepped out, wrapping her shawl tighter as the wind picked up. Lena helped her over a small ditch and began leading the way, her boots crunching over leaves and twigs. As they walked deeper into the trees, cell signal vanished, the trail disappeared, and the silence grew heavier. Sophia turned back once, eyes narrowing at the abandoned car, sitting quietly under the trees like a forgotten shell. Something wasn't right. But it was already too late to turn back. The forest path narrowed until even the wind seemed hesitant to follow. The sunlight dimmed as clouds rolled in overhead, casting long shadows across the jagged cliff edge they finally reached. The cliff overlooked a steep, desolate drop, and beyond it, nestled between the rocks, was the gaping mouth of a cave. Dark. Unwelcoming. Alive in its silence. Sophia paused, her breath uneven. "Lena, where exactly are we?" she asked, placing a protective hand over her belly. Lena turned around slowly, and for the first time, she didn't smile. Her face was no longer soft or friendly. Her eyes burned with something deeper, jealousy twisted into hate, calm molded into madness. "Somewhere no one will find you," she replied, her voice stripped of all warmth. Sophia froze, confusion turning quickly into panic. "What do you mean?" "You know, I tried to be patient," Lena said, stepping closer, her boots crunching against gravel. "I waited for him to wake up. To see you for what you really are, a soft, whimpering little doll he married out of guilt. You were nothing before him. Nothing. But you gave him a baby and suddenly you became untouchable." Sophia stepped back instinctively. "You're sick." "No," Lena snapped. "I'm done playing nice." She pointed toward the cave. "Walk. Now." Sophia's heart pounded in her chest. "Please, my baby. You should have thought of that before you stole my life." Lena's voice cracked with rage. Sophia hesitated, then turned to run, but the uneven ground betrayed her. Her foot caught on a rock and she tumbled sideways, landing hard on her shoulder. Pain shot through her body. She gasped, struggling to lift herself. Lena was on her in seconds, grabbing her by the collar and dragging her, inch by inch, toward the cave entrance. "You don't deserve him. You don't deserve any of this." "Lena, please," Sophia cried, her voice trembling. But Lena didn't stop. With one final shove, she forced Sophia into the cave. The cold swallowed her instantly. She tried to crawl back, but Lena kicked away her bag, snatched her phone, and tossed both down the rocky slope. "You'll just disappear. And everyone will say you lost your mind and wandered off. And Daniel, he'll cry, but he'll heal. With me." Sophia, bleeding and barely able to move, tried to scream, but the cave swallowed the sound like a grave. Lena stared for a moment, her chest heaving, and then turned around and walked away, disappearing into the mist. The silence that followed was deafening. The only sound left was the drip of distant water echoing through the cave, and the shallow, terrified breath of a woman who now realized she might not live to see her baby born. A sharp, blinding pain ripped through Sophia's abdomen, jerking her awake. She blinked into darkness, her body trembling against the icy stone floor. Her hands reached instinctively for her belly, still rounded, still alive. But the pain told her something was terribly wrong. She let out a soft moan, barely more than a whisper in the damp silence of the cave. Her legs were numb. Her head throbbed. Blood clung to the inside of her thighs, warm against the freezing earth. For a moment, she couldn't remember how she got there. Then it all rushed back. Lena's twisted smile, the shove, the cold. Another contraction seized her, harder this time, and she cried out. Her voice bounced off the stone walls and disappeared into nothingness. No echo came back. Just silence. Her hand gripped a jagged rock, not for balance but for something, anything, to hold on to. "Help!" she screamed again, but the mountain didn't answer. Tears streamed down her cheeks, mixing with dirt and blood. She was scared, more scared than she'd ever been, but in the blur of pain, something unexpected came, a memory. She was 8 years old, standing at the edge of a flooded river behind her childhood home. Her mother, soaked and shivering, had just pulled their family dog from the rushing water. "You don't run from fear," her mother said, kneeling beside her. "You meet it. Even if your hands shake." Sophia blinked through her tears. That fire her mother had lit inside her so long ago flickered now. Weak, yes, but still burning. Another contraction hit. Her scream was louder this time. She rolled onto her side, trying to brace herself, her breath ragged. "You'll be okay," she whispered to the baby. "Just stay with me." Outside, the wind howled like a warning. The cave mouth shimmered with frost as snow began to fall in thick, heavy flakes. The temperature dropped with every minute. Her thin jacket clung uselessly to her skin. Her lips cracked from the cold. Then, a new sound, low, distant. A howl. Not the wind. A wolf. Then, another. Closer. Her pulse quickened, throat closing in panic. She was prey now. The world felt like it was closing in around her, her body failing, the darkness deepening. But she forced herself upright, inch by inch, leaning against the wall. "I won't die here," she whispered. "I won't." And though her legs trembled and her vision blurred, she pushed herself forward. Somewhere out there, something had to hear her. Or someone. The snow had thickened, muffling every sound, and the forest lay still, blanketed in a cold silence that felt almost sacred. Inside the cave, Sophia's breathing had grown shallow. Her face was pale, her body trembling with pain and exhaustion. She had no strength left to cry. Her mind drifted in and out of consciousness, and when the next contraction hit, she barely had enough energy to gasp. Then, footsteps. Not the light tread of an animal, but the firm, deliberate crunch of boots on snow. At first, she thought it was a hallucination, a cruel trick of her fading mind. But the footsteps grew louder, closer, until a shadow loomed at the cave's entrance. A tall figure emerged from the snow, wrapped in layers of weather-worn fabric. He wore a thick cloak made from animal hides, patched and rugged. A hood obscured much of his face, but his eyes, sharp and deeply set, scanned the darkness of the cave like he had done it 100 times before. He saw her immediately. Sophia flinched, unsure if she should fear him or welcome him, but she couldn't move either way. Her lips parted to speak, but only a weak breath escaped. The man stepped forward without a word, kneeling beside her. His presence was quiet, assured, like the forest itself had shaped him. He set down a leather satchel filled with herbs, cloth, and tools. Everything he carried looked handmade, his knife carved from stone, his gloves stitched with thick sinew, his eyes speaking of survival. "Don't speak," he said, voice low and firm, with a gravelly edge. "You're losing blood. The child is coming." Sophia managed a nod, grateful tears springing to her eyes. He moved with practiced calm. He cleared a space, stacked rocks into a ring, and within minutes had a fire blazing, filling the cave with flickering light and much-needed warmth. He boiled water in a metal tin suspended by wires, crushing herbs between his palms before mixing them into a poultice. Then, he turned to her, inspecting the gash on her shoulder and the bruises on her ribs. He said nothing, but the twitch in his jaw betrayed his anger. Not at her, but at what had been done to her. When the next contraction hit, she screamed again, this time into his steady hands as he caught the baby. He worked quickly and silently, swaddling the infant in thick cloth from his own cloak. His hands, rough from years in the wild, were impossibly gentle as he cleaned the newborn's face and handed the crying child to Sophia. "You're safe now," he said simply. She looked at him, this stranger who had appeared like a ghost from the mountain itself, and whispered, "Who are you?" He paused, then answered with a faint, almost forgotten name. "Elias." In that moment, under flickering firelight and snowfall, the wild had given her not death, but life. A child born of pain. A mother saved by the most unlikely of hands. The morning after the birth, as the pale sun cast silver light through the trees, Elias wrapped the baby securely against his chest and lifted Sophia into his arms. She was weak but conscious, her head resting on his shoulder as he carried her out of the cave and into the snow-covered wilderness. The journey was slow. Each step tested his strength and balance, but Elias moved like a man who had done this before, not with a woman or child, but with burdens heavier than most could imagine. After nearly an hour of navigating narrow deer paths and pushing through snow-laden branches, they reached a small, hidden cabin nestled between jagged cliffs. It was almost invisible from a distance, built with hand-cut logs and blanketed in moss and thyme. Smoke rose faintly from its crooked chimney. Inside, it was modest but warm. A fire roared in a stone hearth, and the air smelled of cedar, earth, and herbs. A woven hammock hung in the corner. Shelves lined with jars of preserved berries, roots, and old books lined the walls. Elias placed her gently on a bed made from furs and heavy blankets. In the days that followed, Sophia healed. Elias boiled water for her baths, made her wildberry porridge, and tended to her wounds with the same silent dedication he had shown the night of her delivery. He never asked questions. He never pressed for details. He just was, present, grounded, steady. And in that stillness, Sophia found something she hadn't felt in months. Peace. Sometimes, she would wake in the night to find him humming softly while rocking the baby near the fire. Once, he told her about his wife and son, lost years ago to a snowstorm when the world refused to show mercy. He had come to the mountains to die, he admitted. Instead, he survived. Alone. Until her. Sophia didn't speak much of her past, but Elias didn't need the words. He saw it in her eyes, the betrayal, the sorrow, the strength that hadn't broken despite everything. And as she lay there, watching the baby sleep between them. She wondered how a man so isolated could make her feel safer than the one she had once trusted with her life. Meanwhile, far away, Lena returned to Daniel in the city with tears in her eyes and lies on her tongue. She left Daniel. I tried to help her, but she was unstable. She said she didn't want the baby. She just ran. Daniel stared at her, silent, the weight of the lie settling somewhere deep in his chest. The lie worked for a while. Daniel, overwhelmed with guilt and confusion, tried to believe Lena. Her tears seemed real, her story convincing. But something didn't sit right. He'd known Sophia for years. Whatever flaws she had, abandoning her child wasn't one of them. And why had she left without a word, without her bag, without her prenatal records, or even her favorite scarf? Days passed, and doubt took root. Daniel found himself checking her social media, voicemail, old texts. Nothing. She had vanished. His discomfort turned to suspicion when, during a routine sweep of Lena's car, police officers found a cracked phone shoved between the seat cushions. Sophia's phone. When confronted, Lena claimed Sophia had tossed it in frustration during their drive and that she'd forgotten it was there. But the phone's location and damage told a different story. Forensics revealed recent fingerprints, Lena's and Sophia's, on the screen, even though Lena swore she hadn't touched it. Daniel sat in silence at the police station, staring at the evidence bag. Something inside him broke open. He saw the flashbacks clearly now. Lena's constant presence, the subtle jabs she made about Sophia's mental state, her fake concern, her influence over the house staff, and how quickly she had inserted herself into the role of caregiver after Sophia vanished. He remembered a night weeks before the disappearance when he caught Lena going through Sophia's bathroom cabinet. She'd laughed it off then, said she was just looking for aspirin. But now he wasn't so sure. The police, suspecting foul play, launched an official search. Drones were sent over the nearby woods and mountains. Teams with dogs combed through trails. Then came a tip from an unexpected source, a hiker who had taken photos near an isolated stream. In one blurred frame, barely visible, was a man carrying a bundle in his arms. Behind him, a woman trailed slowly, cloaked and small, her head bent protectively over something swaddled. I didn't think much of it, the hiker told the ranger. But they didn't look like locals. More like ghosts. When the photo surfaced, Elias saw it, taped on a public notice board near the base of the mountain when he ventured down for fresh cloth. Days later, he spotted helicopters circling overhead. Their engines thundered through the sky like a warning. He stood outside the cabin, holding the baby as Sophia stepped out beside him, shielding her eyes from the sun. "They're looking for us," she said softly. Elias didn't reply at first. His jaw clenched, but not in anger, something else. Realization. "I think," he said at last, "it's time you went home." The morning they left the cabin was quiet. No words were spoken as Elias packed the last of the supplies. Dried berries, boiled water, a thick wrap for the baby. Sophia, though still weak, stood tall beside him, her child pressed close to her chest. The fire in the hearth had burned down to soft embers. The cabin, their sanctuary, stood like a frozen memory behind them as they began their descent through the snow-draped forest. It took hours to reach the nearest service road, their pace slowed by the weight of fatigue and the baby's fragile sleep. Elias walked ahead, carving a path with his walking staff, while Sophia followed, leaning on his strength when hers faltered. When they finally reached the clearing near the road, the sound of tires crunching gravel nearly made her collapse with relief. A search and rescue jeep rounded the bend, brakes screeching as the driver spotted them. Within seconds, paramedics rushed forward. Sophia was lifted into the vehicle with the baby clutched tightly in her arms. She looked back at Elias, standing just beyond the tree line, a shadow in the snow. "Come with me," she whispered. He shook his head, gently. "You don't belong in the dark anymore." At the hospital, chaos met her. Doctors, flashing lights, reporters outside the gates. Daniel was already there, pale and hollow-eyed, pacing until the elevator doors opened and he saw her. He rushed forward, tears springing to his eyes, but she stiffened at his touch. She allowed him to see the baby, but not to hold her. "I survived," she said quietly. "Without you." Daniel nodded, the guilt written across every inch of his face. "I'm sorry, Sophia. I believed her." The police arrived shortly after. Lena, blindsided by the investigation, was arrested at her apartment. She screamed innocence, claimed jealousy, claimed confusion. But there was no escaping what came next. Elias had returned to the cave the day after Sophia gave birth, suspecting it might be investigated. He had found Lena's discarded scarf, her boot prints, and, most damning, a hidden trail camera set to record motion, something likely planted by a wildlife researcher. Elias had taken the memory card to authorities. Among the footage was a short clip of Lena dragging Sophia toward the cave, muttering, "You should have just left quietly." It was all the police needed. Lena's mask shattered under questioning, and her carefully spun lies unraveled in hours. Days later, Sophia sat on a bench outside the hospital with Elias, the baby sleeping in a bundle between them. They watched the clouds move slowly above the city skyline. "Thank you," she said, voice thick with emotion. "You gave me my life back." He smiled faintly. "You saved yourself. I just helped you walk." They didn't say goodbye with words. Just a look, a silent acknowledgement of something deep, something unrepeatable. Then Elias turned, his figure fading into the crowd, just as quietly as he had entered her life. The city was different now, louder, faster, but Sophia had changed too. She no longer flinched at shadows or searched every face for betrayal. Instead, she walked with quiet certainty, her child nestled against her chest and peace blooming in every corner of her modest new home. Months had passed since the night in the cave, and with every sunrise, she felt herself becoming whole again. Daniel had tried to reconcile, apologizing endlessly, offering therapy, joint custody, even money to start fresh. But Sophia didn't need a fresh start with him. What she needed was space to breathe. The divorce had been swift and clean. The court had ruled in her favor, and Daniel, perhaps for the first time in his life, had accepted defeat. Sophia focused on what mattered, her daughter, her healing, and her truth. She began to write. At first, it was a private therapy, fragments of memory and emotion scratched into a journal. But the words took shape, forming chapters and moments that no longer haunted her, but empowered her. She titled the manuscript Nature's Stranger, and in it, she wove her journey, the betrayal, the isolation, the brutal strength of motherhood, and the mysterious man who had appeared from the forest like a phantom of salvation. The book was picked up by a small but passionate publisher. Early reviews called it raw, gripping, and strangely hopeful. And yet, despite the growing recognition, Sophia stayed grounded. She had found something far more precious than fame: freedom. One spring afternoon, she drove to the mountains, the same ones that once nearly became her grave. Now, they felt like part of her story. Dangerous, yes, but also sacred. She stood at the cliff's edge, her daughter toddling beside her, giggling as the wind brushed her curls. Sophia stared into the trees. Somewhere in the rustling leaves and silent stone, she felt it, him. And she was right. Elias stood deep among the shadows, leaning silently against a tree, his cloak blending into the wild. He watched them, mother and child, his expression unreadable, yet softened by the faintest smile. He didn't step forward. He didn't need to. They were safe. And with that, he turned back into the wilderness, the forest swallowing him like a secret never meant to be told, a stranger no longer feared, but remembered.